Okay. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Adoption Happy Hour brought to you by NAAP. We are the National Association of Adoptees and Parents, where it is our mission to elevate our diverse voices by promoting dialogue, understanding, and healing through education, awareness, and connections. I'm Marcie Keithley, your host for the evening, along with fellow board member Beth Stewart, helping out. Jennifer won't be joining us tonight. So we welcome all of you this Friday night to hear from Lorraine. We're anxious to hear from her again. She's been a guest on our show before, and we're fortunate to have her back with us this evening. But before we begin, we're going to go ahead and have a couple of announcements. And what do you have for me tonight, Beth? Okay, we want to remind everyone this is a public meeting with no guarantee that information or identity is confidential. Portions of this event are recorded and may be shared in our private happy hour group on Facebook and on our YouTube channel. So if you don't follow us on Facebook, Adoption Happy Hour, please make sure you do, because that's where Lorraine's replay will be listed. Remain on mute. You're welcome to raise your hand or use the screen to be recognized. You're welcome to post your comments and questions in the chat. If you are experiencing a serious mental health event or suicidal thought, please contact a licensed professional or the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline by dialing 988. Let's see what else we have. Okay.
Okay. Happy hour, first and third Friday nights of every month. Next week, First Families with Amber Jimerson and Amy Seek will be the second Thursday of the month. We will very soon have the date for Dr. Joyce's reunion group. Sometimes it moves around a bit, but it's always on a Tuesday night at 6 p.m. And then we close out each month with Danielle Gaudette and her Self-Love Essentials for the Adoption Constellation. We pretty much have a program every week. You can find NAAP somewhere every week doing a Zoom program. And that's it for now.
That's all you have, Beth? Okay. Okay, before I introduce Lorraine, Pat, Mimi, one of you want to briefly take about 2 minutes and talk about Cub and the upcoming retreat? Either one of you.
I don't know. Well, the retreat is next week. It's in Redondo Beach at the Sonesta Hotel. Everything starts on Thursday night. Most people come in, so there is hospitality Thursday night, but then the actual retreat starts on Friday and Saturday and ends Sunday morning after breakfast. And we've got I'm not on the committee. I just kind of know everything. So Pat, jump in if there's anything you want to add, but everyone is welcome. It sounds like we have a great group of people coming and amazing panels and speakers, and we're just really excited about it. And I hope a whole bunch of us that are on here will be there. I'll be there. Pat will be there. Whoever else is here, you can raise your hand and say you're going to be there. So we're excited about it.
Thank you, Mimi.
Yeah.
Appreciate that.
Could you say it again, the information, please? Sorry.
So it's next week, starts on Friday morning or Thursday night if you get in Thursday night. It's at the Sonesta Hotel in Redondo Beach, California. And if you go to concernunitedbirthparents.org, there's a whole bunch of information there, as well as registration forms and everything. So I think there's still room.
Is it open to adoptees?
Adoptees, everybody.
Yep.
Adoptees,
Okay.
family members,
Yep.
Birth parents, adopted parents. Yeah.
How would I find out for the future? 'Cause I go to Germany next week, but I would love to go to one in the future.
We always have them in October. So if you go to the Concerned United Birth Parent, it will always list.
Okay.
Well, it's listed in the beginning of the year, but it's always in October.
Okay, thank you. Sorry to interrupt.
Okay.
Thank you, ladies. We appreciate that. So
Forward to
yeah,
seeing you.
I've attended the last couple of years, last 2 years, and I really enjoyed myself as well. It's a great opportunity. If you can make it, I say go. So, okay, so let's carry on then. I would like to at this time go ahead and introduce our spotlight guest this evening, Lorraine Dusky. Hello.
Hello, hello.
We're so excited to have you back on again. We're looking forward to a great evening. We want to talk about the second edition, the expanded version of Hole in My Heart. And we had the opportunity at our mini meetup just a couple of weeks ago to meet Lorraine again and talk about her book and the work she's been doing in the adoption community for decades. So welcome again, Lorraine.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I mean, how many of you have the book? If you've got it tonight, show it. If you've read it, show Lorraine some love in the comments field. Let her know. Yeah, and if you haven't, I'm sure she'll get you a copy. And this is on Amazon, and you can probably get it in every bookstore. Is that correct?
You can, but you usually have to order it. Yeah, you have to order it, but you can get it. If you send your book to me, I will autograph it and send it back if anybody wants to do that.
Yeah. So anyway, let's just dig in and get going. For those of you, I think everybody here, I was looking at trying to see all of our attendees. Everybody's got their books marked. Again, this is the second edition, revised and expanded. I've read the first one. I've read the second one. This one is much deeper than the first. I love the book. It moved my heart as a fellow first mom. I resonated with so much of her story. So anyway, we're going to dig right in, and we want to make note of this too. Lorraine is the first mom who came out in 1975. And we're going to talk a little bit about what 1975 looked like. Lorraine, you want to just jump right in and share with us a little snippet of your story and how you got started?
Well, it has a lot to do with Florence Fisher, who died on Sunday. And I know that a lot of people who were not in the movement early on don't even know who Florence is. And honestly, we wouldn't be here, and this movement would not have happened without someone like Florence, and it happened to be Florence. There was a nascent movement. Jean Payton out in, I think, Colorado, but she was like a one-woman operation, and she didn't really know how to handle the media, and she wrote letters, and she was doing what she can. She was an adoptee, but Florence, who was also adopted, is the one who took this idea and just ran with it. I mean, she was great on television. She had red hair. She was short. She was fiery. She could not be stopped. She could take on any lawyer. The adoptive parents were writing books about against us. I mean, everybody was telling us we were wrong, that the adoptees who weren't happy were really screwed up and they needed help. And I mean, it's hard to describe today how, as I was trying to explain this to the obituary writer, because I mean, I knew that Florence would have trouble getting an obituary in the New York Times, which she really deserves. So I had prepared, with Florence's knowledge, I'd interviewed her and had notes and everything. And so I also, because I used to work at the Times, I knew kind of how to get to the right people. And in fact, used somebody's name and got to the editor. Anyway, she is going to have an obituary in the Times. And I was explaining today to the man who's doing the story about the opposition or the whole thing, because he kind of was surprised, like, how could you object to adoptees getting their original birth records? I mean, he didn't actually phrase the question that way, but I mean, he wanted to know who objected. And I said, basically, it was adoptive parents, and then the National Coalition for Adoption, which we have called NCFA, and a guy named Bill Pierce, who started NCFA, who had come from the Child Welfare League. But really, so much of it goes back to Florence. And so I decided tonight to go through my book and read the sections about me and Florence, basically, because she is the person who got me involved. I didn't know anything about this movement in the early 70s. I mean, I gave up my child in 1966 in Rochester, was in such a deep closet and I was able to do this because I was working as a reporter in Rochester on the Democrat and Chronicle, and I was able to hide my pregnancy from my parents, they who live 700 miles away. I quit my job when first of all, I didn't know I was pregnant till I was about 4 months pregnant. I mean, I was on the pill, and I was on the pill after I was already pregnant. I went to the doctor and had a negative pregnancy test, but it was too early, and he put me on the pill, which of course had catastrophic effect on my daughter eventually. And so, I mean, I was so in denial, and I also, to the women out there, I also spotted a little bit. So I mean, I was like, okay, I'm home free, until I couldn't deny it. But I quit my job. I went into hiding. I didn't tell my family. I didn't tell girlfriends. I had told one friend at the time. I mean, nobody knew. And after I got a job in Albany, I even lied to the doctor there because I had to have an examination for to get on the health insurance program. And when he asked me if I'd ever been pregnant, I said no. And then I sat there wondering, can he tell? Was there something, I mean, I don't remember if I had a vaginal examination with this doctor, which seems unlikely, but I remember thinking, oh God, maybe he can tell that I somehow got pregnant. I don't know. But so the idea that I would ever come out of the closet and be who I became was anathema to me. But I always wanted to know who my daughter was and what happened to her. And in fact, at the time I was dealing with the social worker, I had seen her once or twice when she dropped what I thought was a bombshell, when she told me that my daughter would never be able to find out. I wasn't so concerned about me not being able to find out, but I couldn't believe what she was telling me, that my daughter's records were going to be sealed, and it was basically she was going to some kind of limbo. And I argued with her until she said, if you keep arguing like this, then, we can't help you. The law is the law. This was in New York, and that was the law. And I was there I am in a strange city by myself. I was 22. Obviously, I couldn't find adoptive parents, even though I was thinking, certainly, we have 2 college graduates were given. I mean, I did think of the baby as an object in that case, but, I had to swallow the pill that her records would be sealed. I will say that most people have terrible remembrances of their social worker. I don't, because she never told me that I would forget. She never told me I had to forget. She said, it will get a little better with time, but you will never forget this happened, and you will never forget your daughter. And I clung to that, I think, for years, because especially after I got involved, because I realized how many women were told you have to go out and forget. And I have a friend who was told that she had to think of her daughter as dead. And so, and I know, and there are people who, there are cases where women were told the baby died. So I had a very good relationship with her, and she never gave me any bullshit. I mean, she just really told it like it was. So after I gave up my child in 66, and that is the language I use because that's the language I'm comfortable with. I cannot stand people talking about adoption plans. I made a plan as much as the person who gets thrown a inner tube. That's not what I mean, but something, a lifeline. If they fall off a cruiser in the middle of the ocean, you don't think, gee, should I make a plan to swim to that? I mean, you just do it. And that's how I felt about going forward in my adoption. I gave up my child, I relinquished my child, but it doesn't seem to me like I made a plan, even though I did. But that language is so clean, and it doesn't encapsulate any of the agony and pain that most mothers go through at the time of relinquishing their child. Anyway, here I am deep in the closet. I'm now living and working in New York, and I had a hasty first marriage after I gave up my child to another person. There's nothing wrong with this person, but I would never have married him if I weren't desperate to feel loved by somebody who loved me enough to marry me. And you know, I felt like an outcast. I mean, I just felt like I didn't belong to the rest of the world. I really felt alienated because it's not that I had sex. It's not that I had a baby. It was that I gave the baby up. That made me feel, oh God, like an alien. Anyway, so my marriage is breaking up. I'm sitting in my apartment, and my husband is gone, and I open up the New York Times, and there is Florence. It's July 1972. Adopted children who wonder what was mother like is the headline that rivets my attention when I turn the pages of the New York Times one morning. A woman named Florence Fisher, I read, had an awakening after an accident when the doctor in the emergency room asked for a family medical history and she had no information to give. She was adopted. Assuming she wasn't the only person who experienced this, Florence ran a small ad in the classified section of the New York Times in March. The response was overwhelming and included, to her surprise, a number of letters from mothers who had relinquished their children to adoption. It hadn't even occurred to her that they would be looking too. She ran a second ad, this one directed to mothers. The Adoptees Liberty Movement Association, Alma, was born. There were already more than 1,000 members as I read that day. I knew it. Adopted people do want to know their natural parents. It's not only mothers like me who want information, it's our children too. Mothers like myself are also on Alma. I'm not the only sad sack out there. Maybe my daughter wants to know me. Alma's aim, I read with glowing elation, was not only to provide support and assistance in searching, but to, quote, abolish the existing practice of sealed records. Hallelujah. After the excitement of reading the story falls away, a kind of serenity came over me. Adoption curiosity, the need to know one's family, one's blood kin works both ways. I always wanted to believe it, but I kept my feelings in check, only pouring out some of an essay I wrote over the winter. That will always be the hardest part, never knowing what you are or who you are or what you have become. Every time I read or hear about an adopted child your age, will I wonder if it's you? And later, will I look at engagement pictures in the newspaper and wonder if one of them is you? The guilt I still carry with me today, because she is not with me, weighs me down, doing somersaults in my head every time I talk to a child her age. The piece is on the stands that July. It was written with buckets of tears and high hopes, but mainstream's women's magazine had rejected it. Tu outre was the coded message in their politely written rejections. Eventually, a smart new publication called New Woman bought it. Since I wasn't ready to put my name on the piece, the editor gave it the innocuous byline of Phyllis Bernard and a ridiculous headline, "Things Your Husband/Lover Never Told You About Sex." Like, I mean, please. I mean, I can't even read that today without laughing. It is my first piece about giving up my baby, and I'm pretty sure my husband, I was still married when I wrote it, hopes it will be my last. As the cliche goes, once I got it off my chest, I'd be done. But when something is in the air, it manifests itself in multiple places. So the book goes on about my marriage, but I want to go to what happened that day. Before the sun went down that evening in July, when I first learned of what's called the adoption reform movement, I dashed off a note to an editor at Cosmopolitan and proposed a piece on adoption slanted to their audience. I did not mention my connection. Hey, I'm just on top of what's current. Shame still stuck to me like tar in 1972. You might wear love beads and flowers in your hair, but admit that you had a baby and gave it up for adoption? Wow, man, that's a bar. My secret must be stuffed down, way down. 6 years after my daughter's birth, I'd only told one other person besides my husband, but one afternoon my secret popped out quite unexpectedly. A woman I did not know well and I were out to lunch at a funky festive joint called Bill's Gay 90s. We sat together in a booth, ordered Bloody Marys, and we were talking about our lives up to then. Quite unexpectedly, it felt safe to let my secret escape. Me too, is what she said. I wasn't alone. God, this is still hard. I wasn't the only person with this flaming scar on my breast. I wasn't the only woman walking around pretending to be normal. When she got pregnant, she had dropped out of a Seven Sisters college, moved away, had the baby alone, and finished school elsewhere. Like me, she had found a way back to a life after. Clearly, I could tell a friend, but the world, never. It was too much. Going public in print would change everything. I'd always be the object of pity or scorn, tarred with scandal, a woman who did that thing, an outlier from the rest of humanity. First and foremost, I'd always be a woman who gave away a child. No, I did not never imagine that I would go public, not ever, not in a million years. My mother did not know, and I thought I might not ever tell her. It would make her so sad. So I got the assignment, and I think I have it pretty quickly. And they told me they wanted me to do a piece that would be an as told to story. It wouldn't be my story. Well, obviously they didn't know my story, but it would be, I would interview an adopted person and tell the story of a search and with a reunion. So what did that mean? It meant I could call Florence Fisher, and now I had a reason to go talk to her, and I didn't even have to tell Florence Fisher. All right, so I called Florence Fisher, the star of the Times piece. She and I meet one blistering hot September afternoon in her apartment in Upper Manhattan. There are touches of turquoise everywhere. I don't have this in the book right here, but when Florence did find her mother and went to her apartment, guess what? Turquoise walls. Okay, so I play it cool with Florence. I'm just the journalist. That's me until halfway through the visit. I'm one of the mothers, I say, stifling back what feels like a deluge about to break through the levee. She says she suspected as much as soon as she opened the door. With flaming red hair, plain speech, and a welcoming manner, Florence makes me iced tea and pats my knee. Later, I would see the fire in her, but that day she is soft-spoken and kind. Carrying a secret around is hard work, and now I am finally letting down my guard, with her at least. She is from the other side of the equation, but she understands my torment, for is the opposite of hurt, and as bottomless. She is the first adopted person I have ever talked to, or at least the first one I know who I know is adopted. Maybe my daughter will be like Florence. Maybe she wants to know me as much as I do her. But maybe where my daughter is concerned is a bitter brew of hope and fear. I am terrified that she will reject me. Florence suggests that I write about a woman who found out she was adopted from a cousin while her parents had denied it for years. The woman agrees, as long as she is anonymous. The story is accepted within days after I turn it in. Now the long wait for publication. Anyway, the story ran the following June, but let me ask, I see something else I've marked. At the time, in almost every state, original birth records of adoptees were sealed. Unless there was some fluke in the system, so was my daughter's. In its place, a new birth certificate had been issued, a piece of paper stating that her adoptive parents had given birth to her on the same date and same place that I had. It was most likely stamped amended. That merely indicated much of the document was falsified. A lie, a big, fat lie. The court records of the adoption itself were sealed. Adoption agencies by law were not to divulge any information without a court order. So that was 1972. The piece ran in the following year, and I started going to Alma's monthly meetings, where I really found immense relief in simply being there. It was not only that there were other adoptees who represented who my daughter might be, but I felt there were other mothers there. And so it was just like a sorority of, just like the people here tonight. And it was so comforting. I mean, there was because we were, I would assume that most of the people the mothers, were in deep secret. We had it, and we what we were doing seemed so renegade. At the time, Florence was holding search sessions after the sort of the public part of the meeting, where she did some talking. I mean, I don't remember much about the public part of the meeting itself, because the main thing was the connection. But then after that, she would have search sessions, and you couldn't attend them if you were an adoptee under 18. And I don't remember any kids being there. And if you had a child under 18. So I was excluded from those. I mean, she was very afraid of laws and being shut down and trouble, as we, all, I guess some of us know, there was a lot of trouble. Sandy Musser went to jail because of searching for people who had kids who were underage. So month after month on Sunday mornings or Saturday mornings, I show up wherever the gatherings are held, in church hall and meeting room somewhere. After I go on about the searches. Anyway, when Florence took Alma nonprofit, I was part of the inner circle of the original board members, and our first official meeting was at B.J. Lipton's apartment, an adoptee therapist and author who was in the middle of writing a memoir herself about searching for and finding her mother. BJ is called, as she is called, is the cool intellectual, but Florence is the engine behind the movement. Short in stature, long on passion, she is quick to laugh and just as quick to push back against critics. We're all sure we have the wind of justice behind our backs. We will succeed one day. Failure is not an option. So I began writing for other publications. I guess I was freelancing right at that moment. Anyway, by 1974, I was still in the closet. So that was 72. In February of 1974, there was a trial in the Bronx in New York for a woman named Ann Sharp who wanted to find her records. And Gertrude Mainzer, the attorney, asked me to come. And I'm going to write about that because I basically, Florence and I went, BJ was there, Robert J. Lifton was there. Because he was kind of like the big intellectual. He really didn't write about adoption or anything. He wrote about the effect of the Holocaust, but he was highly respected, and so he was going to also testify. So I guess I didn't mark this, but I wanted to anyway. So soon enough, I'm on the stand. Gertrude Mainzer was the attorney, and she herself was a she was at Auschwitz as a very little girl. In fact, she must have been so young when I don't think she was born at Auschwitz, but she said that when she left Auschwitz and her mother pointed at who survived also pointed at a horse or pointed in the direction of a horse in the field, and the mother said, "That's freedom." Gertrude thought the horse was freedom. And so Gertrude was kind of an amazing person herself. But anyway, let's go back to the trial. Soon enough, I'm on the stand. After Gertrude recites my credentials as a journalist, she gets to what makes my testimony relevant. When she asks if I have any other special qualifications on this subject, I say loudly and clearly, it's because I'm one of them, a natural mother. I'm obviously nervous, or maybe the judge is surprised, but he stops and offers me a glass of water and asks if I need a moment to compose myself. I'm fine, I say. This is not going to get any easier if I take a moment. I'm here to counteract the perception that we natural mothers make new lives without looking back. I'm here to announce that we are desperate to know what happened to our children, desperate to meet them one day. I'm here to say that we do not forget. This is it. My coming out publicly. If before I was a ho-hum witness, now attention is focused. So this is what they look like. I have suddenly morphed from an anonymous woman in a dress into a many-headed hydra, an unpredictable object of wonder. The stout, red-faced attorney for Spence Chapin. This was Ann Sharp wanted her papers from Spence Chapin, and she wanted her original birth records. And there had been testimony about when she draws a tree, she doesn't put in the roots. There was her therapist was there. I mean, there was a lot of she had dated a guy, and then when she found out he was adopted, they broke up because they might be closely related. I mean, she herself was a courageous woman who I did not know, never spoke to Kurt privately either that day or later, but Gertrude had assembled us as the witnesses to get us to open the records. Anyway, okay, so the stout red-faced attorney for Spence Chapin is openly hostile. How scientific is my research? I had written a couple of pieces about this, besides the one for Cosmo. I think I'd written something else, and so that was brought up that I had done a lot of research on the subject. So how scientific is my research, he asked. What are my credentials that allow me to speak for other natural mothers? I have interviewed many, met them in Alma meetings. Am I married? And this is Jermaine Howe. Do I have other children? And this is Jermaine Howe. But I am not allowed to ask questions. He is trying to turn me into a lone voice without a chorus, but his belligerence only serves to peel back my anger. And by the time he asks, don't you believe that there are other natural mothers, the ones who do not come forward, who would rather forget what happened, forget that part of their lives? I find my voice and now boom out my response. You don't have someone in your body for 9 months and forget. He sits down, no more questions. Several months later, the judge rules while Ann Sharp could examine her birth certificate, which apparently did not have the name of her mother on it, she is denied access to her file at Spence Chapin. He adds, however, that her file contains no information that would identify her natural parents. So then why not let her have it? Precedent. So what I was aware of that day is that the press could have been there. And I thought, well, they weren't, but it could have been in the paper with my name. And, guess what? It probably would have gotten back to my family. So at that point, I realized that I could do this. Somewhere in this book I write about this. I was not married at the time. I really was divorced. I wasn't in any long-term relationship. I didn't have to worry about in-laws who would, probably not want a daughter-in-law who had given up a child for adoption and was more beyond that talking about it. I mean, how tacky is that? Who did your oh, that's just so terrible that your son married such a horrible person. So that was later on that it became clear to me that all of my there had been relationships between the marriage, when the marriage ended, and this point in time. But later I realized I really needed to be alone and not be constrained by other families. What I did after that is I went home to Michigan almost within a couple of weeks and took my mother to lunch and told her, and God bless her, the first thing she said was, "How was your labor?" And then I told her what I was going to do, and she said, "I'm with you. If I think everybody must want to know. I can't imagine not wanting to know where you came from. I understand everything." And I mean, my mother never even finished high school, so this was just something that came from the heart. And I just, she didn't have a choice. I mean, I didn't say, "What do you think of this?" I mean, I said, "This is what I'm going to do." And then my father was deceased, but I would have done the same thing with him. I would have probably told them together. And because I had a really close relationship with my father, and we had a one big flare up, which you can read about in his book. But
You look so beautiful.
what?
Oh, sorry.
And
Lorraine, you got on mute somehow.
yeah, I somehow did. I didn't touch anything, I don't think. Anyway, I saw that the host says you're muted. I don't know where I left off, but I told my mother, I told my brothers, and I basically said, I'm going to do this, and I knew that I could. A couple of things were going on. I knew that I had an ability to write, and I knew that this movement needed someone like me. Didn't have to be me, but there I was. And I also felt, even though I talk about how deep in the closet I was because of the shame, I also felt that I could take whatever was going to be thrown at me, that I could be that woman, that I could be the person who I could take it. That's how I felt. Now, at the time that I did come out, Lee Campbell was on television on a show called The Phil Donahue Show, which was an early talk show and very popular. But she was appearing with a mantilla and that covered, piece of fabric that covered her entire, upper body. And Lee and I talked about this. She was still married at the time to her first husband, and he was working in I don't know, a bank or some kind of, traditional corporation, where the kind of attention that this would bring to him would is not something he was willing to deal with. And so I completely understood this, because at least I'm not sure, but it wasn't too long after that Lee came out of the closet herself. But so I think today there are lots of mothers who are out, and they're here tonight, and they've told their families and their kids. There's still a lot of mothers in the closet, especially from my era. But it's hard to understand the depth of the shame that we felt about admitting this. I mean, it wasn't like people said, "Oh, you did a brave." Nobody said, "Actually, you did a brave thing," which is kind of bullshit language that really bugs me when I thought somebody tells me you did a brave thing for giving up my child. I was like, "Whoa, I was not brave. I was desperate." And so, I think this shame, if you've never told anybody, if you're someone in your 67, if you've never told people, the problem with getting this person out of the closet is not actually the telling of the actual secret, but the next step is, what else have you told me in the last 3 decades? I mean, so that becomes the difficult. Can I ask the person who's typing to not do that anymore, because it's very aggravate. It's hard to thank you to see other people writing, because I look down there and I want to read it. So it's very it's hard to reach those people. I hope that all the publicity that everybody does gets to them and makes them see that it's all right to do it. So anyway, I'm going to go on with this with Florence, because Florence, as I've been saying, was the spark plug, and she and I were, I guess I wouldn't call it, we were kind of a team. I mean, we became, that day, we did become lifelong friends. There wasn't anything I couldn't share with her about anything. And so I would sometimes speak at Alma meetings, and but after that, so I told my mother, and then I wrote a piece. I came out of the closet in 1975 in March, with a piece in the New York Times, which I think is about as public as you can get. And I wrote it a couple of weeks after this case. And I want to read a little bit about that. I'm telling my mother, okay, I write an op-ed for the Times, which with a haunting illustration by the prominent Juan Claude Suarez, takes up nearly 2/3 of the page. The piece is called Yearning, and the artwork is fantastic. It goes with it. And one of the things, this is a bit of what I wrote. Research to date indicates that most natural mothers do not wish to remain anonymous to their children, but have a compelling desire to know who they are. I'm one of the statistics. I am a natural mother. An ongoing California of more than 1,000 adopted persons and natural parents indicates data on close to 100 reunions without a disaster among them. Even if the adopted individuals were disappointed, they reported that reality was definitely better than endless fantasy. This is the first time that I'm aware of anyone coming out of relinquishing mother in print, not behind a veil on television, not hiding behind anonymous. To make an impact, to chip away at the concrete wall of lifelong anonymity and sealed records, to make it possible to find my own daughter, to atone for giving her up. And yes, atone is the right word. We encourage other women to come, and to encourage other women to come out of the closet, to let them see that they were not alone. One had to stand up and be counted. People would see me in a different light. People would talk about me behind my back. And depending on their mindset, they would censure or empathize, see me as trashy or brave. All this I knew. Yet someone who has done the deed no one wanted to talk about had to swing the first hammer at the wall of accepted adoption practice and law, an enormous concrete hunk of bad social engineering, emotional and legal, that was held up by legions of adoptive parents and adoption agency workers. They had bought into the idea that it was permissible, even preferable, to act as if the children they adopted had magically arrived by stork without papers of transport or origin, and for what sordid tale the truth might reveal. The day the piece appears in the Times, I'm aware that I am now fair game for many nasty potshots. But the world goes on about its business without noticing. Nothing happens. Absolutely nothing. No one phones. I walk out on the street and no one points. The sun sets that night, and I'm going to be all right. Coming out is easier than expected, undoubtedly easier because I do not have a husband or his family to quibble with or embarrass. I don't know what people say behind my back, but I feel a strong wind behind me. So nothing much happened when that piece came out. But a year later, the New York State Legislature, amazing enough, is considering a bill that would allow people born and adopted in New York to obtain their original unamended birth certificates. We are quietly thrilled. The time has come, maybe. Florence is planning a lawsuit to have the amended birth certificates be declared unconstitutional, but she holds back now. If New York's law fails, could the rest of the country be far behind? And why were we kidding ourselves there? Florence and I troop up to Albany with a handful of others, adoptees, including BJ, adoptive parents, a phalanx of psychologists and social workers, attorneys, adoption agency heads, and another natural mother who turns out to be an adoptee, a double whammy that is confoundingly common but new to me that day. I could barely fathom the double layers of pain. And then I mean, my testimony, the testimony from this hearing is public. I mean, I have a footnote about where it is. One of the things I say is that if I had known that I could someday meet my daughter, it would have been so much easier to sign those papers. I say, speaking into a microphone in a cavernous and largely empty chamber, looking up at the men sitting high above me. Maybe they aren't so far above me, but that's how I remember it. Men who could change the rules looking down on us. My social worker and I went over this point again and again. Never, never, never could I see her, not ever. Time heals all wounds, she would say. It does not heal this one. I am asked about the women who don't want to know the children they gave up for adoption. Do I agree they have the right to not have their identities? I feel, no, I don't. You have a child, you owe them an identity, you owe them at least this, their place in the chain of life. But Senator John Pisani, the co-chair, needs more convincing. Suppose, she said, I don't want anyone to know anything about me. This is a final act on my part, and one of the considerations of surrender is this child is that I remain anonymity. I retain anonymity for the rest of my life. I want to get it behind me. Let's assume she has that attitude, right, wrong, or indifferent. Should she be entitled to have it as a matter of right, or should she, somewhere down the line, suffer the trauma of a confrontation? Trauma of confrontation from her own child? How about a surfeit of joy instead? I mentally respond. But this is not a time to be flipped. A, I say, I don't believe the confrontation would be traumatic. And B, no, I don't believe she has the right to that privacy. I think that woman's right is infringing upon the rights of the adoptees. Somewhere in the room, a man let out a loud, disgusted sigh. I turned to look at him. He is the attorney representing Louise Wise Services, a major adoption agency in New York City that largely served Jewish clients. His name is Shad Polier. Enemy, tall, distinguished, a gray beard, the old order. I refer to an earlier speaker, a representative of the New York Foundling Home, who spoke of the adoptees who come back looking for names and answers. She said that her agency had found about half of the 100 or so natural mothers whom adoptees had asked them to look for in the last few years. No one on the panel had asked her how many of the mothers refused to meet their children. I had sought her out during a break before I spoke. I asked how, and this is my quote from the testimony. I asked her how many women did not want to meet their children, the ones they contacted. I speak loudly into the microphone. It turns out there were none. She said there was one that was reluctant at first, then changed her mind. Anyway, Shad Polier turned out to have a lot to hide because Louise Wise was separating identical twins and identical triplets, and that's the story of the movie. And the good news for me was that about a couple of months later, he died. And I was reading his obituary. I was then working as an editor at Town and Country, and I remember reading his obituary in the bus. And it was a hot day, and the bus is crowded in Manhattan, and everybody's sweaty and no air conditioning. And I just I wanted to hey, I wanted to tell everybody, great news, the old order is dying. And later on, actually, when I was researching the book, I discovered more about him, that he had been married to Louise Wise's daughter, which I did not know at the time. And Louise Wise had plenty, because he came on and when he testified, he uses words like, I don't want to read it. Oh, he says, his soliloquy is peppered with words such as disaster, havoc, pathology, harmful. It is infuriating to listen. He knows nothing. Who is he protecting? Anyway, the next day after that hearing, it was covered by the Knickerbocker News, and the Knickerbocker News in Albany is where I had worked as a reporter after I gave up my child in Rochester and left my job there. So they covered it, and they had a picture of me on the front page. And the only thing I remember about it is that I hated the photograph, because by then it really, I was out. It didn't make any difference. Whether it was on the front page or page 69, so what? It was, I was going to go forward, and nothing was going to stop us. But anyway, that bill that we had such high hopes for then was going to be a prospective bill. And that would mean that only the children who were conceived now, after the bill passed, would have their records. Everybody else, 67 people who were 60, 70, 80, and my daughter, and all of that was going to stay closed. So Florence was adamantly opposed to it, and just said and basically shut it down. She really wasn't going to go along with that. Years later, though, she did. We did talk about the fact that 18 years later, records were still closed in New York. So if she had gone along with that at the time, at least those people going forward, I think that was 1996, would have, or 94, would have had their records. But, we still were nowhere in New York, and it would take another long time. So what happened after that is that I wrote a long piece for Town and Country about giving up my child. Now, I know that seems like a really weird place for this, but the editor was kind of a unusual editor for Town and Country. He was actually himself had not gone to college. He was the son of a Croatian steelworker from Pennsylvania. And he wanted to do a section on children, and I was going to be the editor of this whole section. And I just said, well, why don't we do something on adoption, knowing that a lot of wealthy people adopt, and talk about their adoption reform movement. And he said, yes. I did not say to him, and by the way, I gave up a child. I don't think anybody knew. They hadn't seen the piece in the Times, or if they hadn't noticed the name, because it appeared a year before I went to work there. And I didn't really know what I was going to do, but when I sat down to write, the first words that came out of my typewriter were, 10 years ago, I had a child and gave her up for adoption. And that piece landed me on the Today Show. So it was kind of off to the races. My lighting is terrible, it looks like. Anyway, but back to Florence. Soon after all this, there was another case in New Jersey. And again, Florence and I went up to that, and this time it was covered by the Times. I wasn't in the story, I think, but it was covered by the Times. It was on the news, everything. And at that point, I remember going to the ladies' room, and I found one of the defendants. I think there were 4 women, and she was crying. And I said, "What's wrong?" And she said, "What you said about never forgetting." She said, she is standing over a sink, weeping profusely. When I try to console her, she says between sobs, "What you said about never forgetting, it's true. I gave up a child too. Sometimes you can't think of the right thing to say. The shock on my face would have to do. Being adopted is terrible enough. Who would go out and willingly add more angst and misery to her life by giving up a child, or inflict the same on another? What could be worse? The woman wants her original birth record so she can find her mother, but what about her baby? The woman keeps weeping. What do I say? What is there to say? The layers of her sorrow are backed up like planes at LAX. If one leaves, a new one is ready for takeoff. That double whammy, adoptee / natural mother, is not that all that unusual. Attend an adoption reform conference, and you so often run into the women who did this that your heart spins. Your mind has a hard time getting around the thought. Adoption begets more adoption. The one hard statistic I could find indicates that adoptees are 7 times more likely than the general population to relinquish a child themselves. 7 times. I know that if you've read a lot of books, and if you've read Birthright, I mean, that is what happened to Jean Strauss's mother. Jean Strauss's mother was adopted herself. And then Jean Strauss, when she got pregnant, had an abortion, and when she was in the hospital, there was a nurse who was trying to adopt, and the nurse said to her, the nurse said, well, you're the nurse was trying to convince her to not have the abortion, but to give the child up for adoption. And Jean Strauss said, I knew I was playing God, but I looked at the woman and said, I'm adopted. That's why. And so she understood the pain, and she was at least going to stop the flow of people having it. Why am I so dark? I mean, whoops. I feel like I'm fading away here. So I guess Florence was not in that New Jersey case, but the next thing that happened with Florence is that Lee got involved on an advisory committee, Lee Campbell, with there was enough commotion from all of us, and that's really what it takes, is commotion to get people going. And I mean, the more Florence and I knew that every time one of us did an appearance, if I wrote an article, she wasn't really writing. She had written a book called The Search for Anna Fisher, which I have here. I discovered today, it's pretty rare. Came out in 1973. That was a year after I first read about her. The book came out a year later. And I know that, like Jane, who I write the blog with, even though we don't write a lot anymore, that's how she said she saw it in the library, and she knew what it was about even before she picked it up. So Lee got involved Lee got herself, because of Cub, which gave her a lot of credentials, and it was now there was a whole organization of people saying that they wanted to know who their children were, basically, and working for reform rather quietly. I think in the beginning it seemed like Cub was more of it wasn't that involved in legislation. I don't think that was the first aim of Cub, and actually it's part of the reason I was never involved, because reform was always really my thing. Go to the ramparts. I sometimes felt that if adoptees actually stormed the records and it got a story in the paper, and it was like an uprising, it would have done a lot of good, to show how desperate people were, because people were beginning to find. There were searches. There was an underground railroad. People were beginning to find children who were underage. I was still writing, and I did not go that route at that time, because I just didn't. So when this proposed national law came out, Lee was on the committee, and she must have really swung a big hammer, because it was for open records, and we were stunned. I mean, this would have been fabulous. And I mean, I have in the book, I quote from it, because it basically said that birth mothers are not entitled to this. There's no constitutional right to privacy from your own children, and and that the birth record should belong to the person to whom the record is about. I mean, Florence and BJ and I testified. I mean, there were hearings held around the country, and adoptive parents and the National Coalition for, well, that was weird. The National Coalition, God is speaking to me. The National Coalition for Adoption got involved, and there were, I don't know, I cannot imagine why I've turned so dark, because nothing is happening here. I can't really, I haven't moved a light. I really don't know what's going on. You're just going to have to assume that I am not going away. And so we testified up at Columbia University, and then this came out, and then there was going to be a hearing in Washington, and both Florence and I were invited to speak at a subcommittee of a Senate House subcommittee, and we trooped up to Washington. We shared a hotel room, and let me see if I can find that part about us testifying, because NICFA had people testifying against us. Well, they had a natural mother, actually, and she was like being held up by NICFA people, I assume, because she wanted her testimony to be anonymous, and which made me kind of furious. So when I got up there, I said, you know, why would you ever believe anything that was anonymous that another person stated? And why should you believe that she's, you know, well, she was crying by this time. I mean, I probably shouldn't have attacked her, but I was so angry, you know. So Florence and I were together that night. I can't find that space. But in '79, I published Birthmark, which was also the first memoir. Why? But well, I think Sandy Musser's book was privately published, but this was, you know, I was on the Good Morning America then, and the publisher sent me on a book tour, and the Good Morning America experience was interesting because I was living in Sag Harbor, where I live now, and the night before, and so now I'm in a hotel that they're paying for on Central Park West, and it's about 8:30 at night, and the phone rings, and it's a producer from the show asking if I would mind if Bill Pierce was on with me. Now, I don't know if any of you recognize Bill Pierce, but he was the enemy. He was in this article in 1972. He started the National Coalition for Adoption, which was as a collection of basically of adoption agency. I really have no idea why my computer is so dark, and there's nothing I can do about it. So suddenly this phone rings, and she said, would you mind if we have Bill Pierce on with you? We think it'd be a good idea to have the other side of the story. And I thought, what is this? You know, I mean, I did not want to go on television and have this turn into a debate. So basically, I'm very proud of myself. I had the courage to say no. After, you know, going back with this person for a while, as a woman, I said, you can have him on, you know, and you can have me on another day. Now, I mean, that took a lot of, you know, because they could have canceled it. But of course, I guess in the back of mine, I recognized what would be the point of having him on talking about this unless they had somebody there who was actually saying the record should be open. So the producer caved, and that was that. And I did the show, and I, you know, but Bill Pierce probably came from Washington. This was a ambush that they had planned. They had not run it by the publicity people at M. Evans, which was the publisher. They just thought that I would, you know, be willing to go along with this, and I wasn't. Years later, I was on a PBS show called the McNeil Lehrer Hour, pitted against a Harvard professor adoptive mother who had adopted 2 children for Peru, and she basically told the audience and me, and you know, there was a phalanx of lawyers who were there on camera, like they have today, but they were like everybody was against me. Every other person I had was against me. And she basically said, this is just garbage. The next day, I got a call from the Today Show, because she was going to be on the Today Show, and they wanted to have me on against her. And I suggested that Florence do it, and Florence did, and Florence made mincemeat out of her. I mean, she was just the right person. It was better to have an adoptee arguing about, you know, the research and everything, rather than me. And also, I didn't want to do it. So you know, throughout all these years, Florence and I just supported each other and had occasional lunches. And, you know, once I moved to Sag Harbor, I didn't go to meetings unless I was going to be a speaker. And then Birthmark came out in '79, and I think it's instructive to read some of the headlines and things that happened, because it really does tell you, well, this is bizarre, folks, but I am doing nothing to the lighting. The lighting is acting on its own. And there it goes again. So
I think it's
anyway,
Florence.
what?
I think it's Florence coming through
Okay,
to mess
you know,
with
that
you.
is interesting. That because that hasn't happened before. So okay, this is about Lee. I'm going to read you this. This is from that law that we didn't get. This was the law that Lee was involved in crafting. There can be no legally protected interest in keeping one's identity secret from one's biological offspring. Parents and child are considered co-owners of the information regarding the event of birth. The birth parent's interest in reputation, which could be significantly altered by an unexpected appearance of a child from the past, is not alone deserving of constitutional protection. To me, those are such beautiful words. I mean, they are so clear. And this bill, talk about this bill kind of gets lost because it never happened, and it's all going states by states. It says, you know what I forgot to talk about, a Florence thing. After this bill in New York didn't pass, Florence filed with Alma a class action suit. And there was a very empathetic lawyer from New York University who wrote the brief. And we just got creamed. I mean, we got creamed we got creamed in the lower courts. We got creamed in the next court, and the Supreme Court didn't hear the case. The thing that is interesting about the decision that did not go to the Supreme Court is that the Judge Oates wrote that, hello, Florence, that that this lawsuit or opening up the records could have a deleterious effect on adoption going forward, that women wouldn't give up their children if they knew that they could be found one day. Now, there have been studies, I don't have them right at the hand. The states that have open records have no fewer or more adoptions or not adoptions or abortions than the states right around them that have sealed records. It has absolutely no impact on going forward. I mean, this is relative to Dobbs, but the Dobbs decision basically encourages adoption. And footnote 46 is what does it in there when the Alito wrote that a woman giving up her child today has no worries that the child wouldn't find a good family. I mean, to me, that's just a gratuitous plug for, you know, give your babies up, ladies. You'll be fine. So in '79, Birthmark came out, and I think the reaction to Birthmark is well, actually was in the, you know, it got published by the 13th publisher who had seen the book. I mean, it was rejected at a lot of places, and I don't believe it was the writing, it was the subject. They just didn't want to hear about this. I mean, you know, it's even a hole in my heart now. I mean, I certainly would say it isn't a pro-adoption book, as anybody who was at that meeting knows. I mean, it caused a lot of a fiery explosion from an adoptive mother who happened to be sitting nearby, and and all the adoptees who were there, and Marcie rose up and basically clobbered this woman or got her to shut up. And then she put on the radio until finally she and her husband, I guess, walked out, because she had adopted 3 children, and then those adopted children had adopted other children. Her sister had adopted children. I mean, I didn't really have to say anything. The adoptees took her on, and that really is the right reaction. That was I know some of you are here, And it was a beautiful event for me because I have been attacked a lot. I'm kind of used to it, but it is still unnerving. But I'd never been around people I'd never been with anybody who could actually stand up for me, and I didn't have to do it myself. And the comfort that I felt from all of you who were there, Beth and Marcie, and I saw Patricia here somewhere. And she's waving. I mean, it was fantastic. And I loved it. So, and Patricia wrote a story about it. It was, better than me writing about it. It was absolutely great. I mean, the woman just, was obviously listening. She was sitting nearby and she was giving one of the adoptees the evil eye. And I think that that MC
It was
spoke
MC.
first, didn't she?
Yes.
Yeah. But then, and then the woman was like, "Rah." And sometimes that's happened to me at dinner parties. I mean, not recently, but after Birthmark came out in the 70s, I mean, somebody would just start, I was sitting next to a guy who was he was the famous obituary writer for the Times, and he just basically lit into me. I think he was the father of a child. I mean, he had a bad reputation for being a womanizer, for going out with, I don't know if he had affairs, but he probably did. And his wife was there, and she finally stopped it. There were 12, I think there were 8 people at this dinner party, and everybody was like, "Oh God," everybody's like turns to look at me while this is going on. And his wife finally said, "What were you doing? We just got back from Wales, and we were going through cemeteries where we were looking for your ancestors. So how can you do this?" So she shut him up, and then eventually they left, and I never had to encounter him again. But that was kind of the reaction but from a lot of people. And I actually heard that people at dinner parties would talk about it out here in the Hamptons. And so it was, it caused a lot of grief, and so what, as it should have, adoption is treated like this sacred cow. And we who say it's not the perfect wonderful thing, then the adoptive parents aren't necessarily saints. I also think that what happened is that the book didn't just come out. I also had a piece in Newsweek. I had a My Turn called, what was it called? I gave it, Who's My Daughter, that appeared in October of 1979. And if you didn't, you didn't have to read the book, you just had to read the piece to get it. I heard that Ben Gazzara, who was a kind of a indie actor and director, that he actually pounded the table, like, what right does this woman have? I wasn't there because I said to my friends, he pounded the table, and they said, yeah, he pounded the table, so and another party, I found out that some woman was going around the room talking about me, anyway. There was an interviewer in Windsor, Ontario. The whole book tour started out in Detroit, where I am originally from. And then there was an interview from a blonde, pretty woman from Canada. And I mean, I think she was ready to take off my eyeballs. I mean, it was as if that woman that we saw the other night had interviewed me. I mean, she was so angry. And my mother happened to go with me on all the interviews when I was in Detroit. But then the next interview was a radio interview, and the woman was completely sympathetic and also sympathetic about what had just happened. So it was up and down. But here's what was in the New York Daily News. When people discover what Lorraine Dusky is about, they're likely to cut and run, because Lorraine Dusky is one of those. A woman who had an illegitimate child, gave her away, and now wants to find her, is the lead in the New York City's Daily News. I botched up my life, runs a headline in the Houston Post. Always looking for daughter is a headline in the Milwaukee Journal. Meanwhile, the reviews of Birthmark are up and down. Some newspapers had adoptive parents review it. None approved. Many reviewers think I carry on too much about having lost a child to adoption. I've made my bed, so what did I expect? An anonymous reviewer in Kirkus Reviews finds me hysterical. That's a quote. with a, quote, guilty search that may or may not find sympathizers with the true confessions crowd. An adopted mother of 4 in Dallas at the Dallas News urges me to come to better terms with my life and, instead of working with Alma, join birth parent support groups that deliberately do not assist women searching for their children. And I thought to myself, that would be support group run by adoption agencies, right? Who else would do that? Okay, where are these support groups anywhere? A writer in Vancouver, British Columbia, is irritated that I do not consider the adoptive parents, how they might feel. Whether unspoken or not, that is the common lang question that hangs in the air, fueled by popular advice writers like Ann Landers, who has been unwaveringly against searching, no matter who does it. A reviewer for the Herald Post in El Paso says I offered, quote, no salad reasons for revising the laws on adoption. An adoptee in the LA Times is plenty annoyed with me and probably her own unknown natural mother, but she does want to know more about the movement to unseal the records. She asked what my brothers thought about me writing such a scandalous book. I mean, this was in the review. What did my brothers think? Having read the book, she knows that my father's dead, but how do my brothers feel? Would a male author be questioned about his sister's feelings in a memoir that doesn't really have anything to do with them? Obviously not. While these brickbats are bracing to read, they encapsulate the public perception of adoption and those pesky natural mothers who ought to disappear and shut up. I soon realized that Birthmark is not being taken seriously as a piece of writing by most reviewers. They do not see me as a writer who happened to write about her experience, but as a woman scribbling in her journal to exercise her demons. Nearly all of the write-ups are not about the book per se or the writing. They are about the issue and the woman who dares to attach her name on it. But there is good news too. Library Journal calls Birthmark a deeply moving account of the biological mother's need for information about the adoptee. Highly recommended for public and most academic libraries, and it was. And oh, this is boasting. A spectacular addition to feminist literature, words that are balm to my beaten up ego. Publishers Weekly calls the book powerful. This poignant, candid record should amount to convincing argument to change law that prevent adoptees and natural parents from knowledge of each other's lives. So the power, is there. And even today, if you're criticized, and I think even if you write a book today, and I know if you write a book today, the issue is still so overwhelming, even though today when I talked to the guy who was apparently writing an obituary about Florence Fisher for the New York Times, he really had to be schooled on how anybody could object to adoptees getting their records. I mean, to him, it seemed like obvious that it's absurd. So it was a nice conversation with this guy, but it was interesting how far people have come from the late 70s to the point where, people just kind of feel, actually, lots of times when I talk about this, people are amazed, and I'm sure that some of you have found this also if you talk about this, that the records aren't open for everyone. I mean, certainly, I can see some people nodding. I mean, they act like, you mean, not everyone, you mean, this is still the case? And you have to say, yeah, it's still the case, and it's still a fight going on. So that's why it's so important to get more people. I mean, right now, it looks like Michigan has a good chance of getting a bill passed. I don't know. Sometimes people are overly optimistic, but they have a governor, they have a woman governor, and that I don't know if that makes any difference at all, but they do have 3 Democrats. They have all different people. This is not a Republican or Democratic issue. In New York, for years, there was a bill to open the records that really didn't get passed because the Democrat who ran the assembly in New York was not going to let it pass. And I don't know if he had a personal reason, but we never had enough money to bribe him. His name is Sheldon Silder, and he is in jail for taking bribes to help somebody else out. So, and I have letters from him telling me, some bullshit reason about why it's not going to happen, because I would write to him, but he ran the assembly. And this happens in many places. Somebody has a lot of power in the legislature, and they can really control how the vote goes. In New York, for years, we had a guy named Joe Bruno who also went to jail, but I think Bruno died at some point. He was an adoptive father, and when he left the Senate in New York, it was also taken over by another adoptive father, and they were both against it. The second adoptive father is also in jail. So New York politics are just as good as Washington's.
Right. If I could just interject just 1 second for the sake of time.
Yes.
We're running low. We could go on all night here. I know that, but I know I wanted to get a couple of questions in, but one thing I did want to ask you, and I think this is a perfect time to ask the question, is in all the decades of your work, speak to the attendees. What can we all do or continue to do, or to all of us to become adoptee advocates, and how can we help legislation? What advice would you give all of us? I think we're going to have to close on that.
Well, it's organize, and get involved. I mean, somebody, if it is not happening in your state, maybe it's because you need to do something. I mean, you're here tonight. I mean, and also write letters, make phone calls. I mean, find out what's going on if you're in a state, and even if you're not. I mean, like, I'm not in Michigan anymore, and I didn't give up my child in Michigan, but I do hope that I can find some mothers who are going to write letters. I mean, the states usually need. I can write a letter to Michigan, but so what? I didn't give up my child. It's not my record. The states, the people mothers are, adoptees need to lead the movement, and they need the mothers to convince the legislators that they should do it. I mean, this movement needs both sides of this equation to be forceful. People need to come out of the closet and talk to your friends about it. I mean, don't be shy about it. I mean, it's easy for me to say because I've done it for so long, but really, if you can't do that, get involved with the legislation. You can go to your state capitol and lobby when it's necessary. You can write letters, you can make phone calls, and you don't even have to tell your neighbor you're doing this if it's too hard. But Florence and I recognize that the more publicity this issue got, the more people came out of the closet. And by that, I just don't mean mothers, I mean adoptees saying we want our records. I mean, the power is in numbers, and everyone is needed to speak out however they can, whenever they can, wherever they can. And if there's without numbers, states just don't get anywhere. You need to have, and you need both people. I know that in some cases, the adoptees seem to act like, we don't want to deal with the mothers, and I think they have some resentment or thing, but you go to those legislatures and, they really, they start talking about protecting birth mothers. I mean, and it becomes, I don't think you find a legislature today who's going to actually flat out tell an adoptee you shouldn't have your records, or you have no right to have your records. There's been enough publicity, there's been enough movies, etc., and there's been enough people in action in other states, but they still think, what about the mother who's going to drive her car in the river? I mean, I heard that when I was working in New Hampshire, that some mother had gotten in touch with one of the legislators that she was going to drive her car in the river. Well, I don't know if she did or not, but one mother who threatens to drive her car in the river cannot stop this movement. It is going, and we are going to win. Every state is going to have open records, but it doesn't happen unless people get off their tush and get out and do something about it. It's like the Me Too movement. It didn't happen until voices were heard. So do it.
Yep, that's it. Thank you very much, Lorraine. I'm sorry, but I'm going to have to cut you short here due to time. But I wanted to get a couple of questions in, but we're right at the 8:30 hour. So we want to, once again, thank you for coming on. And again, the book is Hole in My Heart. For those of you that don't have it, would like to read it and go ahead and order it. I would encourage you to do so. Susan, I'll let you ask one question in 1 second here. But we really appreciate you coming on. Huh?
I'm sorry I went on and on.
That's okay. That's, happy hour. We've done it all here. So this is your time, but we didn't get enough questions in, but that's okay. That's okay. But Susan, ask one question, and then we'll
Yep.
have one closing announcement.
Okay, just first, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. So the hole in your heart, because I'm going to cry. I'm not a crier either, because I was an adoptee that never met her birth mom, Helen Jean Koski, who went to the unwed home for children in Salvation Army in Boise, and at 2 days old relinquished me, and then at 10 days old. So this is the piece when I watched the Primal Wound and got to go to the convention and ask that question. So I'm going to just ask it for you. What was it like? How did you ever, I always felt like, okay, I'll say it a different way. Always felt
Wait,
like
I
I was
didn't-
forgotten. Okay, I got it.
I don't
got it.
quite understand, Susan.
So here's
I don't,
the question. The
okay.
question is I always felt as an adoptee that I was given away, then the person went to lunch and forgot about me and never thought about me again. So the important piece for me to hear today is I would like to hear the fact that if true or not, that you never forgot about that child, that you thought about it, and that it did break your heart, and it wasn't just something you did and then went to college or went to lunch and never thought about it again.
You know, there is a section that I sometimes read, and I think I read it at the group meet thing. Until I found my daughter, every blonde person her age who is a female could be my daughter. I mean, and also when I was driven to the hospital, there was a bank of forsythia bushes were in bloom. She was born on April 5th, and for forsythia in a window, like, where's my daughter? I mean, a little girl arguing with her mother at the mall or the coffee shop or at Starbucks or whatever. I mean, until I found, and this isn't just about, finding my daughter. I mean, I used to go to Starbucks in the morning, and I remember when somebody comes in with a little kid, the first thing I do is my brain goes, is that kid adopted? Does he look like his mother? I mean, I have been doing this ever since maybe because when I got pregnant. I don't know. I mean, I never forgot. I mean, I know what stuns me are mothers that are not nice, that reject and don't want to meet. I mean, it just kills me. I mean, if I could reach all of them and talk to them, but they're really hard to reach. The more we talk about it, the better it is. But I mean, women don't forget. You don't have a baby in your body for 9 months and forget. I mean, you're never forget.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I really appreciate. Thanks for letting me ask the question.
Thank you, Susan. Okay, Lorraine.
I'm so sorry that because I wish somehow I could. There's no way to stay for the people who want to stay and ask me questions, because I'm raring to go at this point.
I mean, I'm okay. Beth, we stay on another 10 minutes for questions. Let me go ahead and stop the recording.